All right, welcome to the Cygnal Pulse Pod. Joined here today by Alex Tarascio, who does most of our international polling work and a lot of issue polling work. You may remember him from a beautiful beach in Dubai. The second episode that we did, a special episode of the Pulse Pod. And we're here to talk about our June National Voter Trends poll, fielded June 3rd through 4th, 1,500 likely 2026 general election voters. So here's what we're going to do today. We're going to do our top 5 takeaways as usual. We're going to do a new voter reality check segment, and then, of course, close with our winners and losers lightning round. So first up, Trump's big, beautiful bill came out of the House, kind of stuck in the Senate. He wants it out by July 4th. Doesn't appear that that's happening currently in the Senate, but hopefully some of the things we lay out here will encourage the Senate Republicans to move forward with what the House passed. It's really popular with parents, with swing voters, with lower income groups, all segments that became really important for Donald Trump in the 2024 election, especially the tax cut segments. And then Speaker Johnson, for the work that he's done, really came out a winner in this too, in an improvement in his image in just a 1 month period. So, this is really resonating with voters. When you explicitly tie it to Trump, it doesn't do nearly as well. If you just frame the big, beautiful bill, not even calling it that, but just lay out here are the key components of it. Do you support or oppose it? It is almost hits 50%. Pretty limited opposition to it. When you say it's Trump's bill and you call it the big, beautiful bill, and you say here's what the one side says, here's what the other side says, support flips for it, mostly driven by women. They actually drop off next 12 points on that. But what's most fascinating to this, and it's kind of going to be a theme through what we're talking about here, is that you've got really high income voters are negative 16 on the big, beautiful bill. And it's really fascinating. What do you think is driving that, Alex, of these high income voters against a tax cut?
This is going to be a theme in a lot of my answers, but I think for this particular response, high income voters are predominantly Democrats right now. And their partisan alignment, their partisan identity, I think, is driving the opposition to this bill, because they should be the beneficiaries of this.
Yeah.
If you're looking at media, predominantly Democratic-run media, then they constantly will tell you that the people at the top end of the income spectrum are going to be the big winners of this. They should be supportive of that. That's a lot of money that's going to go into their pocket.
Yep.
And so the fact that they're not, I think you can really just attribute that to them being ideologically aligned with Democrats who don't want to see this policy passed.
Yeah, it's folks voting against their own self-interest. And you see this, the media talks all the time about Republicans being the ones who are voting against their self-interest. But this is a very clear-cut proof of people voting against their own self-interest. And it shows you how strong emotions and ideology are when they're saying, they're basically saying, I'm willing for a tax increase on myself. That's what they're saying, these high-income folks. If this does not pass, that's the result for them. One thing that's also really interesting that we've seen in the last few months is an increase in the national mood, positive mood of the country. I mean, we've been tracking this for 2 cycles now. So almost 5 years we've been tracking this, and it's the best number that we've had in direction of the country. And it's only down negative 3 points now. So 50% wrong direction, 47% right direction. And you would think that with the way that the media is talking about how things are going, tariffs are destroying us, inflation's not under control, this big, beautiful bill kicks people off of Medicare or Medicaid, and you would expect that number to go the opposite direction. But I think it breaks the narrative that the media is essentially, whatever they're saying, the country's not buying it right now, that people are more and more positive about the direction of the country. So what else are you seeing in the big, beautiful bill on the polling data we just came out of the field with?
Well, I want to speak to that last point that you made. Every question that we ask in here and every answer that we get, people express their opinion to the best of their knowledge about what they think about the tax cuts and various policies. But really the big one that matters is that top line. Is your country going in the right direction or is it on the wrong track? And the fact that for 3 years, I think September 2022 is when we started polling on this question. And the 2 lines have been really far apart.
Yeah.
And this is the closest that the 2 lines have ever been. And I have to tell people whenever I send this data off, particularly my European friends, that being only 3 points underwater is actually quite good. on this question because we're usually under. But that is a record number. And I think that tells you so much about the national mood that you would get a better understanding looking at that rather than looking at support or opposition of a really zooming in on a minute policy.
Yeah, well, it's the culmination of everybody's opinion into a single question, basically.
Yeah, and so that's everything, and it's not only driven by Republicans. That this is a countrywide, and so I really like this answer as a metric for how people are feeling. But as far as the one big beautiful bill goes, the responses, I was a little surprised at how positive it was. People were pretty open to the sausage making, which is a messy process. That's why we have the term sausage making.
And that's why it's one big beautiful bill and not 13 slightly beautiful bills.
That's why. And a lot of people get upset about the fact that so much of this does get jammed into one package. It's because it's really hard to get people all on the record in Congress to support and vote for anything, particularly in the Senate. I spent some time in the House, so we have a friendly rivalry between the House and Senate. Senate doesn't think so. But on this side, the tax cut provisions did particularly well. People really want to see the tax cuts extended, and they have various levels of support for the different policies in there. SALT is largely an unknown policy, but I think people are going to be patient with the Congress and expecting it to do its job.
Well, we ask folks on these individual components, and you can go to cygn.al to our website and see the whole deck there with our analysis. But no tax on tips plus 51% net support. Senior standard deduction increase plus 56% net support. Make permanent the Trump tax cuts. We didn't even call it TCJA. We said the 2017 Trump tax cuts plus 19 net support. Border and military funding plus 36. I'm a little shocked that wasn't higher. Work requirements for able-bodied Medicaid and food stamp recipients. Holy audience, real quick. How do you think this is going to come back? Okay, audience, you said negative. It's going to be upside down. It's going to have opposition to it. Nope. Plus 38 net support for that, which totally breaks the narrative.
That one surprised me.
But then roll back Biden's, IRA plus 4. People don't know what that means. SALT cap raises, like you were talking about, only plus 5 net support because I don't think people know what that means. I even pulled the data for the high tax states, and it matches identically the top line. So it's not like the high tax states who this is going to benefit even see a benefit in SALT cap increases.
I think this is a debate that is largely happening inside the Republican Party, and it's a very active, lively debate. But it's good to zoom out and realize that people, to the extent that people know about this at all, even the beneficiaries, if they don't care, then that tells you a lot about the politics of it. I understand that you have to get all the votes that you can in a very narrowly divided Congress to pass something, but out of every provision in here, I don't think that people are going to be cheering from the rooftops for a 4x SALT increase versus some of these other policies, which are quite popular.
Yeah, well, go back to what you were talking about, the 200,000 plus a year higher income folks. They are the ones who are going to benefit from this. Because if you think about, just like do basic math, the current cap is $10,000. So if you're in a state where you're paying 10% tax, state tax, which is pretty high. I mean, even for like a New York or a California, I don't think anybody making $100,000 is paying 10%. So, let's just use that for the sake of easy math. This means essentially you're making more than $400,000 a year under this new cap. Those people aren't our voters anymore. The folks between 2 and 4 and 100,000 and more, those are not our voters anymore. Yet we're going to the mat to get them a $300 billion tax cut.
Yeah, I'd prefer, they have to do what they have to do to get this thing passed, but I would prefer that they talk a little bit more about ending tax on tips. That is overwhelmingly popular. Even a majority of Harris 2024 voters support that. This is one of the a few areas of bipartisan agreement, ending the standard deduction or increasing, the standard deduction on low and middle income seniors. That's another one. But this other piece, this able-bodied Medicaid, adding work requirements, for able-bodied Medicaid and food stamp recipients, 43% of Harris voters support that. And I've been hearing a lot of news in the New York Times, Washington Post, and other legacy media about how this is going to throw millions of people off of Medicaid, that this is life-saving care that they get. That's not a clear message that it seems like Harris voters and Democrats are getting.
Yeah.
It's not as though majority support are supporting it, but they're quite open to it. And later on, we asked some other questions about this, and this showed up as a pretty popular provision.
Yeah, let's go ahead and jump to that while we're on it here. So we're moving some topics around. Voters view Medicaid more as a temporary bridge than a permanent entitlement. So we gave people a choice. Is this how you view it, this way or this way? And what were you seeing in that data on specifically about how voters view Medicaid?
So overall, 58% of Americans said that Medicaid should be a bridge to recovery rather than a permanent lifeline. 38% see it as a permanent lifeline or an entitlement. That is outside the traditional partisan gap. We're a very narrowly divided country, but 58-38 is not a narrowly divided answer. And what I see driving that, and I'm weaving together a few different answers that I saw in this survey, is that Democrats, particularly older Democrats, even though we're so divided in so many ways, they see work as at the core of what it means to be an American. If you can work, you should. And I don't think any amount of partisan messaging, kind of celebrating victimhood, which is really what I see dominating a lot of the Democratic Party messaging today, I think that can only be so effective. That among many, many Democrats, they just see work as fundamental, and they see that as a core way of how people are treated fairly in this country, that if you can work, you should work.
Yeah. Well, even 35% of liberals say that it should be a temporary bridge. So your core ideological base, you're losing a third of them off the bat. I really think this is something that Republicans should lean into further.
I agree.
We should be messaging on this that if you can work, yes, we'll give you a little support, but you're not going to be able to stay on this program forever. This is for people who can't work. This is for people who are disabled. This is for the elderly. This is for children. This is not for a 33-year-old dude who has a job.
This is the Democratic Party that I grew up with. I mean, we're a Republican firm. We're working for Republicans, but I want to have a healthy body politic too. And Democratic Party that wants to strive towards something, that wants Americans to actually achieve everything that they possibly can. That's the Democratic Party that won presidential elections over the past several decades. It's aspirational. And I think that piece, that part of the Democratic Party is speaking to that desire for aspiration. And so the sooner that Democratic elites and policymakers and messengers can speak to them, I think that'll have an even more broad appeal than the way it's showing up in this poll.
Let's jump to another topic that has been dominating the last few months, and the media narrative is one thing, and our data shows something pretty different here. So, voters back the goal of bringing home jobs using tariffs, and Democrats have totally changed their position on trade. Do you want to dig into that?
No, they haven't. I loved this one, and so again, this is a theme here that since the Democrats lost this last election, I see them in search for a message, for a new leader, and the message that they attached to in this particular question is the response that I trust the free market and don't believe the government should intervene. That is amazing. I love that. I love that the Democrats are saying 54% of them.
It's like an old school Republican, silk stocking country club Republican stance on trade.
They do. And, this is happening in part because these voters used to be Republicans in some cases, not in every case. But, as Republicans have grown more skeptical of free trade and some of its consequences, I think got a more nuanced view about free trade having costs and benefits. Democrats are embracing the free market approach and don't want to see government interference. That's probably good for the soul if Democrats are just saying the government shouldn't interfere no matter what. I think that's a good thing. I want to see more of that, and I hope they continue to embrace that. But the reality is that's probably not a deeply held view. And that just happens to be the answer that aligns most against what the Trump administration is doing. And so hopefully it's enduring, but I wouldn't be holding my breath on that.
So the way we asked this question was giving voters three options. You mentioned one, which is free market, government should not intervene in trade. The second was I support Trump's goal to bring back manufacturing to the U.S., but I don't like the methods he's using. And the third was I support using tariffs to pressure companies to bring production back to the U.S. And this kind of broke down almost a third and a quarter. And then, of course, your unsures in there. But if you combine the two options of I'm behind Trump, but I don't necessarily like what he's doing, and yes, I support 100% what's being done, it's 60%. So you would think watching the media that the tariffs were just horrible. Nobody supported them. And when you frame it like this, which is not, do you like or don't like tariffs? Because I think people still don't even understand what it actually means, what it looks like. But when you frame of the purpose of the tariffs, 60% support. I mean, this is just absolutely huge to get something at 60% when you would assume that based on how the media talks about this, this has 30% support. And I really think it's another example of Trump derangement syndrome, in that Trump takes a position and the Democrats rush to whatever the opposite of that position is, even if it is the Republican, or their old Republican position. They're just going to go complete opposite whatever Trump is doing. And, on this, you've got 64% of Trump voters fully support using tariffs to pressure companies to bring production back to the U.S. Why would Trump not jump all over this issue, keep it forefront? I really see it as something similar to the able-bodied work requirements within the One Big Beautiful Bill, where Republicans could latch on to this. And I think the more we do it, the more we're actually going to see the direction of the country improve. Because to your point earlier, if people didn't like some parts of what was going on, we would see a reversion of direction of the country, not an improvement in direction of the country. So this kind of goes into another topic that, we've had a lot of talk about with Doge because of what Elon Musk came in and did. And, I'll just say up front, I'm so glad he decided that he's going to destroy 25% of his wealth in pursuit of saving our country by getting control of the, ridiculous spending that we're on. So thanks to him with that, I think it also shows the power of the media. That when the media is talking about something constantly, it raises it in salience of voter attention. And so on this, we wanted to really find out the answer to this question, which is, are voters ready for tough choices to tackle the national debt? Because there's not an easy solution. Even if we just went back to 2019 spending levels, that's helpful. Doesn't really solve the problem either, because it's not necessarily discretionary spending that is eating up all of the spending overall. But what did you see within, because we asked two questions on this. How concerned are you about the national debt? And it wasn't just I'm concerned, I'm not concerned. We added a lot of levels of concern to try to figure out how intense is that concern. And then we asked another question, which was basically, I should have had it in front of me here, but it's basically asking them if they're willing to cut spending. Are you willing to cut loss of benefits and services for some in pursuit of the lowering the national debt? So what stuck out to you in these two questions?
So the first one on debt concern is that this is not a partisan issue. And that's really remarkable. Anytime that you don't have a partisan breakdown, I think is notable, and people should kind of perk up and pay attention. And in here, 89% of respondents are concerned about the national debt. There's a little bit of a difference by age. Older voters are a little bit more concerned. Men over 55, 95% of them are concerned. Men under 55, 86%. Those are still really high numbers. And so the difference is
even bigger when you look at extreme concern, though,
yeah,
on that piece. And so let me add this note, too. Thanks, boomers, for putting us in debt and then being concerned about the debt you put us in. Thank you.
But it is quite high. It's quite high across gender. It's quite high for Republicans and Democrats. There's not a huge difference among those who are extremely or very concerned about the national debt. So that's different. That's different than this issue was treated really since 2011 was the last time that there was a knockdown, drag-out fight between the parties over this that had something successful with the sequestration law that happened under Boehner. But then we had the second question is, okay, if you're concerned, we agree on that, do you support or oppose the federal government reducing government spending to lower the debt, even if it means a loss of benefits and services for some? And overall, it was 53 support, 40% oppose. And so still a pretty comfortable margin, 13% support. There's a little bit more partisan breakdown there, but what used to be
big gender break too.
There is a big gender breakdown. Men definitely support this more, even across age groups, and women are less enthusiastic about reducing the national debt, even if it's a loss in benefits for some. Generally, young people care about this a little bit less, but here there's a gender divide. But this didn't used to be good politics. For a decade, it's been terrible politics. That might be changing. I don't know if it's changed yet, but it's getting there. And I think that Democrats, Republicans, everybody is seeing that the biggest outlay in the federal budget now is interest on the debt. And
outside of entitlement programs.
Outside of entitlement for now.
Yeah, for now.
But as that continues to get worse and nobody really has a solution to it, this will cease to be a partisan issue and just be a huge problem the United States has to deal with.
Yeah, I totally agree. And, even female swing voters back spending cuts with consequences by a 10-point margin, which even though female voters as a whole are a lot less supportive of making tough choices compared to their male counterparts, I think it's interesting that female swing voters, probably the most important segment of female voters, are net positive in making these tough trade-offs. Let's go to our last segment here before we get into our new voter reality check, and that is on anti-Semitism and fairness. So, we tried to figure out, on the fairness piece, here's the question. For each one of these types of groups of people, white, Black, Hispanic, Asian, Native American, Muslim, Jewish, Palestinian, not all encompassing, but at least ones that definitely get a lot of attention in the news media. We said, if you believe they are generally treated fairly or unfairly in American society today. So that's how the question was framed. And then on anti-Semitism, it was just a very basic question where we said, how concerned are you about rising anti-Semitism in the U.S.? And I'll be honest, I didn't expect this to come back the way it did, not because people aren't concerned about it, but because I would bet if we had an open-ended question and ask, what is anti-Semitism? We'd have a lot fewer people be able to answer the question. So that was my theory going into this, is that yes, there would be higher concern than not concern. But it was 82%. I mean, it was a really big concern number, with 31% extremely concerned about this. And so it definitely broke my narrative in my head of how many people know what this is and then are concerned about it. And as older voters are even 10 points more likely to say than those under 55. And we always use these you hear us talk about these breaks of over and under 55, because in a general election, that tends to be a pretty clean 50-50 break. About half the voters are over 55, about half the voters are under 55. So that's why we use that break in general elections. But, older voters are more likely to say that Jewish people are facing unfair treatment. And another thing that really stuck out to me was this kind of scales with voter propensity. The more frequently you vote, the more likely you are to be extremely or very or even somewhat concerned. And the lower frequency folks are, they tend to be more undecided on this, actually. It's still very strong numbers. But it's less strong than older voters. What in these two questions really stuck out to you?
So for the anti-Semitism question, this was one where the breakdown is less on partisanship and more on age. And so the older you are, the more concerned you are about anti-Semitism. And for those who were not concerned about it at all, the highest rate of that was for men under 55. So younger men are the least concerned of any group about anti-Semitism in the country. And I think that maps generally onto how I see the issue talked about. That does have something to do with in the later question about which groups are treated fairly or unfairly. There's a similar breakdown in age in how people perceive the Jewish people or how respondents perceive the Jewish people as being treated fairly. Older voters think that they are more unfairly treated in society. The younger that you are, the more likely you are to say that the Palestinian people are treated unfairly and that Jews get fair treatment. And so there's some correlation with age there across these two
also
questions.
A gender correlation too. So women are more likely to say than men that Palestinian people are being treated unfairly.
They are.
One thing that really stuck out to me that I found was interesting is 41% of Trump voters said that white people are treated unfairly in society. And yes, he had more white people vote for him than not white people, but the coalition that elected him was a lot less white, significantly less white than in the past. And so that number to still be pretty high, I thought was interesting, that this is not just non-white people being treated, people perceiving them being treated unfairly, is that there's a large segment of Americans that also believe white people are being treated unfairly. And then when you break this down from a partisan perspective, you get pretty different results. So if you look at Republicans, their number one group that's being most treated unfairly are Jewish people, 57%, white people at 40%, Native Americans, 38%. Shouldn't have given them the blankets. And then Democrats, sorry. And then that was a bad thing that we did, right? We can agree on that.
I think we can agree on that.
Democrats, their number one group of being, first off, Democrats think everybody is being treated unfairly, which I thought was really fascinating that if you look at what's wrong with their party is it's like a party of grievances and everybody's being marginalized. Nothing's working for anybody because these numbers are so much higher. Black people, 73% being treated unfairly among Democrats. This is their views. Palestinians, 70%, Native Americans, 70%. Well, totally different than, and maybe it goes back to the whole work requirements thing that we're talking about is like the ideologies have very different views. The parties have very different views on the role of an individual and their own individual responsibility. Maybe we get back to talking about that as Republicans.
This response, I think, more than almost any other one, crystallized the difference between the two parties today. Is that the Republicans think that basically people get a fair shot in American society, and that most groups are not treated unfairly. 57% of 57% of Republicans think that Jewish people are treated unfairly, but every other group, it was a minority. And so majority of Republicans think that basically if you're in America, then you have a fair shot. That's the view of America that I have. That's the pull yourself up by your bootstraps view of America. That's the aspirational view. Democrats are the mirror image of that. They think that every group is treated unfairly, except for white people. That white people are the only beneficiaries of the positive things in American society. And that drives how they view so many of these different issues. And so when there are deviations from that, that's interesting to me, like the Medicaid work requirements. But like that's not the reality. I mean, the reality is somewhere in between those two things. And it's a heck of a lot closer to the Republican side than it is to the Democratic side. And it simply cannot be that only white people can benefit in this country. Like just look around you. There's lots of benefits that accrue to other non-white people, especially in urban centers where most of these Democrats are living. And so this one is a little frustrating to me, but does help me understand how Democrats view the country today.
Agreed. Let's go to our special segment here, voter reality check. So we want to have surprising or counterintuitive poll findings from this National Voter Trends poll with how does that compare against what maybe party leaders claim or what the media is saying. And so we want to point out places where that diverge. So what's one finding this month that totally flips the script on what we hear from politicians or the media that you saw?
So my favorite one is the collapse of abortion as a top issue. That
you just stole my loser. I'm gonna have to come up with a loser.
I'm sorry. Now. I can nominate some other losers for you if I want, but this is one that it does diverge from the dominant narrative to a really great degree, and I see it tied into some other answers in here. That 2% of voters, 1.7% actually, see abortion as their top priority, and even among Harris voters, it's only 2.2%. And so this is not a partisan split. Democrats had maybe, I think it topped out at 20% or 21% earlier in our poll of Democrats saying, or everybody actually saying that abortion was their top issue.
Well, that was right after Dobbs. It was the fall of 22, the midterms. That was the peak.
So that was one of the peaks. Another peak was this year. It was right after Trump came into office. And there's just been a collapse since then. And there's also been a collapse in media attention and several other things. But when I see that, abortion is a tightly held belief. Like that's the core of why many, particularly young women, but young liberals oppose the Republican Party. They oppose Trump. And for that to collapse so much it makes me ask why, like what's going on there? Is it actually a sincerely held view that they care about this a lot? Is it that the Trump administration has come in and they are not doing things on abortion? And so they're seeing that all this concern is not being met by action on the other side. Or what I actually think it is this a media narrative that pumped people up, got people really freaked out during the election, spent a lot of money, probably made a lot of consultants really wealthy. And then as soon as the election is done, people stop talking about it. And these people are wondering what they are supposed to care about. So I don't think that they're Democratic
waiting
voters
for instructions.
Well, I don't want to. Actually, I do think that's it. I think they are driven to a very large degree by what the media is talking about. And I don't think that those voters are well served by that. I think that they would be better served by like principle-based, more consistent positions. I think there's a lot of people that do care about it. But to see this collapse is just, I think it's incredible.
It's the boy who cried wolf. They used it so much. And then I think voters looked around and said, oh, no, we're not going back to the Handmaid's Tale days.
And this is a dangerous thing because this happened in the Tea Party era. And I worked a lot in that era, and voters got really juiced up on a lot of issues like the national debt. And then Republican Party came into power, and people thought they were going to do all these things, and they found themselves disappointed. That you said the sky was falling, and now you have the power to supposedly stop it, and you get real comfortable there. And if that's happening in the Democratic Party, then they're going to be due for some of the same reckoning that has changed the Republican Party to a great degree. And so it's one of these many data points I look at in the ongoing political realignment of American politics.
Well, that to your points tie into what I see as a reality check, and that is that we talked about it earlier. That despite media framing high income voters, they're the least supportive of Trump's economic bill that will probably benefit them more than folks lower down the income scale. And I think it ties into two pieces. One is that this is the diploma divide in action. So, I probably say this every single time I get a chance to speak, is that the lower down you are on the diploma divide, on the educational attainment scale, the more likely you are to be Republican now. The higher up you are, the more likely you are to be a Democrat. But this ties into the second point, which is Democrats pay way more attention to the news, and they pay way more attention to the mainstream news. And so whatever's happening there is where they're getting their marching orders and instructions from on what they care about and are paying attention to. So since you have totally stolen my lightning round here, I'm just going to, I may even make up something for this, but give me a winner and give me a loser of what you saw in the polling data for June.
Okay, so my winner is Mike Johnson. As people have gotten to know him better, Speaker of the House is not the most well-known.
Unless you're Nancy Pelosi.
Unless you're Nancy Pelosi, because you've been around for a long time. And
people hate you.
People have strong opinions about Nancy. But Mike Johnson, for a long time, people have either not heard of him or had no opinion, and those rates were quite high relative to the people who have a favorable or unfavorable view of him. But the lines in our survey have ticked up, both for favorability and unfavorability, but they are converging. And so more people like him more as he gets to be more well-known by the country. And
he's a likable dude.
I think he's a likable guy. I think he's got a good demeanor about him. He does a lot of media. I think he's actually quite a strong messenger. And so he's the big winner in this poll, even while the Republican Party, or rather Republicans in Congress, have grown less popular by 9 points compared to just last month.
Big movement on that one.
And so for him to improve his popularity while his caucus is going the other direction makes him my big winner.
Okay. Well, then I'll do my loser then, because I just made it up. So Leader Jeffries on the other side of Speaker Johnson is now underwater. So this is not an isolated thing where Mike Johnson was in the news a little bit more and got more favorable. I think what's happening is he's a likable guy. People see him more, and it magnifies that. We have an axiom here that money magnifies in races that we're doing. And if a candidate is not a likable person and you throw a bunch of money behind them, it's actually going to have the inverse effect of what you're wanting to do. I think we see that with Leader Jeffries, not really a likable guy, not on message, not relatable. He gets in the news more, he goes underwater. Johnson gets in the news more, he goes above water in his image. So who's your loser then?
My loser, Democrats in Congress. They are 15 points underwater. They are tied for their worst showing this year in this poll. It's hard to be that unpopular when you're in opposition, and it is, I think, happening because they don't have a message. Because Mike Johnson is a strong communicator, and he's got a hard job to do, but he goes out there and he communicates pretty well. He's effective. That's a lot harder for a Democrat, even for a good communicator, when your message is all over the place. Yeah. And so they are not deciding their message based on some bottom-up response. They're deciding based on what Donald Trump's doing and how they can respond to that and how they can oppose Trump that day the best.
Yeah.
And they got to do better. And so the other loser to the flip side of that is, Democratic partisans and Democratic voters, they deserve better. I don't want them to win, but they deserve better.
My winner is basically a double negative, that I think Trump fatigue is totally overstated. Because if people were tired of Trump, you'd see it in his image, you'd see it in the direction of the country, you would see it show up in his policies and his positions. And it's just not there. The Republican brand is better than the Democrat brand, even though both saw some reversion over the last month. But Trump is just holding strong. And I probably said this multiple times of him being the winner, but at least the fatigue of him is totally overblown, totally oversold, overstated in general. So thank you for joining us on this June Pulse Pod episode of the National Voter Trends Survey. And Follow us on social at CYGNAL or our website, cygn.al. And definitely go check out the deck for this. It's really good analysis. Thanks to our team for putting that together.